Everybody, my name is Kat Bowser. I'm your resident fantasy therapist, and welcome back to my channel. Those of you here for the first time, welcome. My name is Kat Bowser. I'm a licensed therapist. I'm also a writer working on my first two novels, one start of a series, one a standalone. And on my channel, I like to talk about what I consider to be the heart of all writing, and that is the characters. And the heart of the characters is their psychology. So that's the angle I like to take with pretty much everything I talk about on my channel. So this is another video that I thought I'd just throw out there for fun, because one thing I have noticed during this pandemic is my muse is finally waking up, but it was asleep for a while. Definitely stress and just the unknown can definitely do that to people. But it got me thinking, what are some sources of inspiration for creativity when you write? And I primarily write fantasy, so you're going to see a lot of world building type of inspiration here, but I think a lot of them can be used to help almost any type of writer, so I hope you guys get some out of it. So that being said, I'm going to list five main places I go if my creative well is feeling dry. So number one, history. History is such a wide range of honestly anything. I mean, I can go to history to look for ideas about events, about people, about locations, architecture, technology, all that kind of stuff. You will find no end to the interesting things you can come up with. I think this has definitely become more popular as of late in no short manner because of George R. R. Martin. He definitely pulls from history. And something I hear a lot that I kind of want to disagree with is if you're pulling from history, you're cheating. Not really. In my mind, not really. Because pulling from history doesn't mean that you're literally pulling topic for topic for topic from history and just planting it in your story. That's not what it means. For example, I'll use Game of Thrones for this because, like I said, I think it's the one that has made it most well known, and it also has kind of come under fire for it. So there are going to be spoilers for the books ahead, just heads up. So let's take one of the most infamous ones, the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones. I don't remember exactly which book it's in, honestly, because it's been a while since I've read the books, but Red Wedding, Robb, his mom, and a bunch of loyal Starkmen are essentially slaughtered at a wedding. And it's called the Red Wedding because of all the blood, essentially. Martin actually pulled from two specific events for this story piece. The first of these is known as the Black Dinner of 1440, in which James II invited William and his brother of the Douglases to dinner. And after essentially a regular meal, a black bull head or a black boar's head, depending on who you talk to, was brought out, and that was known as a symbol of death. And then William and his younger brother were taken outside, given a mock trial, and beheaded. That is one event that inspired the Red Wedding. The second event that inspired the Red Wedding is known as the Massacre at Glencoe. I'm probably saying it wrong. Which was essentially just what it sounds like. A group of people were invited. When they arrived, they were essentially massacred. I think it was like something like 38 people were killed, something along those lines. There are a lot more political aspects to it, but I don't feel well informed enough to go into them. But that was a second inspiration for the Red Wedding. So, in my mind, what George did was he took aspects of these events and blended them and then added his own creativity to it, and then you get the Red Wedding. And I think that's really what history can do with your writing, is it gives you ideas that you can kind of play with to fit your own world and your own story. And I personally don't find that cheating. I think that's the same as getting inspiration from anywhere else. The nice thing about when you use history is you can look at what led up to it and what was the fallout. Because a lot of times if we're going to do an intense moment like, for example, the Red Wedding, there's got to be a fallout because of just all the political and societal weight behind it. And George does do that very, very well. So I like using history. Sometimes I will just look up, most interesting events in history, and I'll just see what I find. Sometimes I don't really find anything that I think fits. Sometimes I'll find something like, ooh, that's interesting. And then I can kind of play with what is something maybe similar that might have happened. I also think this is important, especially in world building for establishing your own histories, because history is complicated. And I think one of the best ways to create a history that is believable is to study one. And so that's just my thoughts on it. Second point of inspiration, other stories. I think this one kind of goes without saying, but I think every author has some form of inspiration just from the things we read, the things we watch. Tolkien, for instance, took from Lord knows how many myths, legends, religions, all those things, from Norse to Finland. He used a whole bunch, but he also made them his own, and it's kind of the same kind of thing. Look at how many retellings we have now. We have modern day retellings of classic fairy tales because the core event is what we're interested in, but we can put it with different characters, with a different setting, adding a different angle to it. I've seen a whole bunch of retellings of like classic fairy tales, but with same-sex couples, and they're really good. They're really interesting. And I think that's fun. I personally love mythology. I like Egyptian, I like Greek, I like Roman, I like Norse. I just find it very interesting. I'm starting to explore some African. I also like Japanese. So if I need to come up with ideas for world building or religions or stories, I like to look at just the stories that have existed across cultures over the years. And then I just apply them to what are my own characters' beliefs and what would they come up with. So, like, for instance, in Japanese mythology, there's a story about, I think it's called The Peach Boy, about a boy who is literally born out of a giant peach. And then he goes on to kill monsters and things like that. But we have very similar stories all over the place. I believe the story of Thumbelina. She was born from a flower that was planted by her mother, and the seed was given to her mother by a witch because the woman said she wanted a child. And similar thing, so you can see kind of the similarities, but there's also this wide range of differences. And so that's why I think reading is really important for a writer. I don't read as much as I would like to, but I have gotten back into reading more. I see a lot of advice of make sure you read outside your genre, and while I think that's true, I also think that you shouldn't force yourself to read a genre you don't like. Like, for instance, I'm not a huge fan of contemporary, but I do revisit it every so often just to see, is this a story that I can get into, have my taste change, that kind of thing. So I don't automatically turn down a book because it's contemporary, but I do have to consider, is it something that would hold my attention? Because I think if you force yourself to read a genre that you just legit don't like, and you've discovered you don't like it, it's not really going to do much for you. And you're going to probably find a lot of books that, while technically well written, just aren't for you. And I don't know, I think that reading is very important, but I also think you should definitely not force yourself to keep reading something you don't like. So like for me, I read fantasy, I read sci-fi, I read horror, I read paranormal, but I don't read a ton of contemporary. But I will read one or two. I have found one or two that I do like. But basically, reading and just seeing what other ideas are out there. You might be surprised what it triggers in your own brain. All right, number 3. This is mainly for world building. Tourist sites. And by that I mean not necessarily sites that only tourists go to, but I'll put it this way. I go into Google and I type in most interesting places in the world, and I see what I get. Our world's weird. It's really weird. We got some interesting things going on. I believe there is a lake. I want to say it's in Australia, but it might be in New Zealand, so don't quote me on that. That is Pepto-Bismol pink. And they're not sure why. They think it might be some of the plants or algae that's growing in it. But it creates a very interesting aesthetic, and so I like how it looks. So that made me think, are all the lakes or rivers in my world, are they all blue? Or is there one that's a different color? Because that's fun. There's also, again, I don't remember where this is. I do remember reading a lot about it, but for the life of me, I can't remember where it's at. But essentially there's a lake that is essentially a lake full of sulfuric acid. It's so acidic that if you go in it, you will die. And so they have all these warning signs around it. And I think that's interesting because I started looking into what causes that, because just like anything, your world should have places that are beautiful and wonderful, but they should also have places that are dangerous. And I like that it's not always because there are bad, quote unquote, bad people there. It's because sometimes nature is just weird. And there's also, I like mysterious things. Like in the United States, God, again, I can't remember the states to save my life, but there is it's up in the east, I think it's up in the eastern states, where it's called Devil's Kettle, and it is essentially a river that flows into a cave. It splits, so one spills down into like a pool, one goes into this opening in a rock, and we have no clue where it goes. Hence the name Devil's Kettle. They have done so many things to try and figure out where this water goes, and they can't find anything. And so I think that's fascinating. They've also found caves and such that I want to say it was in Antarctica, but I'm not sure. Antarctica or Mexico, one of the two. Anyway, they found a cave that was almost like a time capsule, like locked in like the prehistoric era, like with the level of oxygen and the type of plants and stuff, and that's fascinating. So if you're trying to come up with interesting things for your world, look at our own world, and you might be surprised what you find, because I think sometimes when we're starting to create places for our worlds, we want to make sure they're not quote unquote too extreme or too unrealistic, which is good. I mean, I get why people do that, but look at some of the stuff in our own worlds. We have some things that are bizarre, and we still can't figure them out. So if you're coming up with ideas that you think are too extreme, check out some of the stuff in our own world. You might find it's not as extreme as you think. Number 4 place, and this again is more for world building or creatures. Our ocean. Our ocean's weird. It's very weird. The deeper down you go, the weirder it gets. As I said in one of my videos before, we've explored, I think, something like 10% of our ocean, if that. 10 to 12%, I believe it is. We have better maps of our moon than we have of our ocean. So if I'm looking for ideas on monsters especially, I go and I look up deep sea creatures, or I look up like the rarest animals found in the ocean, or sometimes I look up things like how deep is the ocean, because they still aren't entirely sure. They have an idea, but they're not entirely sure. And that gives me ideas about, because if you think about it, way back in like the Jurassic, Cretaceous period, we had even more bizarre creatures in our ocean. And a lot of times I think they get overlooked for the dinosaurs. There was a creature that had a circular saw for a jaw, essentially. And this was a legit creature that was alive and lived and hunted. And so those kind of things really get me thinking of, okay, if something like this could exist, what kind of creature could have potentially evolved in my world? And the thing I like with oceans is a lot of times, even with worlds and civilizations that are very advanced, they're usually not going to know everything that's in their ocean. So there's always a hint of mystery there. So if you want to throw in a creature that they stumble across that no one's ever seen before, it's technically possible. It makes sense. So that gives you a lot of variety, I think, too. And with that being said, last one that I looked to, again, this one for landscape, world building, creatures, all that kind of stuff. Outer space. Much like the ocean, there are some very interesting planets out there. And again, I kind of do the same thing I do when I talk about finding things on our planet that are interesting. I just type in the top 10 most bizarre planets that ever been found. And we're always finding new stuff. So I think, let's see, my last search I did, I found a planet that is slowly being eaten by its star. I found a planet that had burning ice. I found a planet where it rains glass sideways. I found a planet that has winds twice as powerful as the speed of sound. Let's see, a planet that's made of diamond. And these are all just, you can find them with a simple Google search. And some of them we have a lot of info on, some of them we don't. I actually started learning about, when I found the one with the burning ice, I started learning about different types of ice, which I'm not a science major. I had no idea there was more than one type of ice. So that was very interesting for me. But I've been using it because one of my cultures lives in the north where it's very cold. And so I was looking at what were the different types of ice. And I actually found a type that is actually, of all places, is going to show up in one of my deserts. Because that's fun, and that's not something you see very often. Because I don't think you don't have to be extremely well versed in science to completely grasp all these things. There's some things when they're talking about planet alignment and things like that. I don't always follow all of it, but I can follow most of it. And the idea, like I said, is you're not going to just take, okay, here is this element that we found on this planet. I'm going to just plop it into my world. That's not how it works. But what you can do is you can take ideas from what you discover and you can put them in your world or with your creatures and things like that. And I just think it adds more flavor and it gets your imagination going, because when you're looking at things that to you seem like they shouldn't exist, but they do exist, then it gets your brain generate even more ideas. Okay, if this exists, then what can I come up with that could legitimately be possible? And I think it's a lot of fun, honestly. I definitely recommend, even if you guys aren't necessarily doing a lot of world building, I recommend just reading through them a couple times and you might find something that you can use. It's always fun anyway. So those are just mine that I tend to use if I'm having a little bit of a creative slump. And I hope you guys can maybe use some of them for yourselves. As always, if you guys have comments or suggestions, leave them below. I will get to them as soon as I can. And if you like this kind of content, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss when I upload. And until next time, I hope you guys have a good one and stay safe.